The fluorescent lights of the Westbridge office tower hummed their familiar tune as Margaretchen stood in the center of the executive conference room, her cleaning cart beside her, while every eye in the building seemed to bore into her through the glass walls. Security guards flanked the doorway. The building manager, Robert Davidson, stood with his arms crossed, a tablet in his hands displaying what he claimed was irrefutable evidence. Behind him, on the massive screen that dominated the wall, frozen CCTV footage showed Margaret's cleaning cart position near the CFO's office at 11:47 p.m. the previous Tuesday. "Mrs. Chun," Davidson said, his voice carrying that particular tone of false regret that people use when they've already decided you're guilty. "We've given you every opportunity to come clean. The Cartier watch valued at $18,000 went missing from Mr. Patterson's desk drawer between 11:30 and midnight. You were the only person on that floor. The security logs confirm it." Margaret's hands trembled slightly as they gripped the handle of her cart. 42 years old, a widow for 3 years, mother to a daughter studying pre-med at State University on a partial scholarship that Margaret's night shift cleaning wages helped supplement. Her entire life balanced on the razor's edge of one accusation. "I didn't take anything," she said quietly, her accent carrying the weight of 20 years in America, 20 years of proving herself, 20 years of being invisible until the moment someone needed someone to blame. Davidson tapped his tablet. "Then you won't mind if we check your locker, your bag, your car." The words felt like a trap closing around her throat. But what Margaret didn't know, what no one in that room knew except Robert Davidson himself, was that the missing watch was currently sitting in Davidson's own safe at home, one of 17 high-value items he'd systematically stolen from various offices over the past 14 months, using his position and access to security systems to create perfect scapegoats from the cleaning staff. The operation was elegant in its simplicity. Identify a valuable item, disable specific camera angles, plant suspicion on the overnight cleaner, collect insurance payout, sell the item through a fence in Newark, split the profit with the property management company's security director who helped doctor the footage. What Davidson also didn't know was that his perfect system had one flaw he hadn't accounted for: the building's new AI-enhanced security system that corporate headquarters had installed 3 weeks earlier, running parallel to the old system, capturing footage he didn't have access to yet. And that system had recorded everything. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. 2 days earlier, Margaret had arrived for her shift at exactly 9:45 p.m., the same time she'd arrived every weeknight for the past 6 years. She swiped her access card at the service entrance, nodded to Jerry, the night security guard, who was usually reading mystery novels at his desk, and pushed her cart toward the service elevator. The Westbridge Tower was a 23-story monument to corporate success, home to 3 law firms, 2 accounting firms, an investment management company, and the regional headquarters of a pharmaceutical distributor. Margaret cleaned floors 18 through 23. She knew every office, every desk, every quirk of every executive who worked late. She knew that Mr. Patterson on 22 always left his coffee cup on the left side of his desk, never the right. She knew that Ms. Rodriguez on 23 kept a photo of her daughter's wedding as her desktop background and always said thank you when she passed Margaret in the hallway, even though most executives looked straight through cleaning staff like they were furniture. She knew that Mr. Kim on 19 was having an affair with someone because he received flowers every Friday that he hid in his filing cabinet. She knew the rhythms of this building the way a musician knows their instrument. What she didn't know was that Robert Davidson had been watching her for weeks, studying her routine, timing her movements between floors, calculating how long it took her to clean each office, choosing her. That Tuesday night, Margaret started on 23 as always. The executive suite was empty except for one associate still working, headphones on, oblivious to everything except the spreadsheet glowing on his screen. She emptied trash bins, vacuumed, wiped down the conference table where someone had spilled coffee and not cleaned it up, sprayed and polished the glass walls that gave the executives their view of the city lights below. At 10:40, she moved to 22. Mr. Patterson's office was dark. Margaret unlocked it with her master key, the key that Davidson would later claim gave her unlimited access to steal whatever she wanted, and began her routine. Empty the trash, Dust the shelves. Vacuum. Wipe down the desk. Careful not to disturb the stacks of papers he always left in specific arrangements. She noticed the framed photo of his grandchildren had been updated. 3 kids now instead of 2. She smiled slightly, then moved on to the bathroom attached to his office, scrubbing the sink and toilet, replacing the hand towels. She was back in the main office, spraying the windows, when she heard the elevator ding down the hallway. Footsteps approached. Margaret continued working. Probably the associate from 23 heading home, or maybe one of the lawyers who worked ridiculous hours. The footsteps passed Patterson's office without stopping. She heard a door open and close somewhere down the hall. Then silence. At 11:15, she locked Patterson's office and moved to the next one. What Margaret didn't see was Robert Davidson, who had entered Patterson's office at 11:40 after she'd left, using his own master key. He spent exactly 4 minutes inside. When he left, Patterson's Cartier watch, a gift from his wife on their 30th anniversary, kept in his desk drawer because Patterson was paranoid about leaving it at home after a break-in in his neighborhood last year, was gone. Davidson had disabled 3 specific camera angles that covered Patterson's door and the hallway approach. The 4th camera, the one that showed Margaret's cart positioned near that area earlier, remained active. Perfect positioning for his narrative. But the new AI system, installed by corporate IT and not yet integrated with building security's access, had captured Davidson entering and leaving Patterson's office. It had captured him checking the hallway before entering. It had captured the slight bulge in his jacket pocket when he exited that hadn't been there when he entered. And it had captured him stopping at his own office to make a phone call that lasted 6 minutes, during which he called Jerry the security guard and told him to make sure his logs showed only Margaret Chin having access to the 22nd floor between 11 and midnight. Jerry, who owed Davidson $3,000 from a poker game and who desperately needed his job to support his disabled sister, had done exactly what Davidson asked. The next morning, when Mr. Patterson arrived at 7:30 and opened his drawer to put on his watch before his 8 o'clock meeting, he found it missing. He called building security immediately. Davidson, who as building manager was automatically notified of any theft reports, had arrived within minutes, his face arranged in exactly the right expression of concern and determination. "I'm so sorry this happened, Mr. Patterson," he'd said, already pulling up security footage on his tablet. "We'll get to the bottom of this immediately. Let me check the access logs." And there it was, Margaret Chun, floor 22, 10:40 p.m. to 11:50 p.m. Only one person had access to this floor during that window, Davidson had said, his voice heavy with manufactured disappointment. "I hate to say it, but we've had some concerns about the night cleaning staff. I'll need to review the footage more carefully. But..." Patterson's face had hardened. "I want this handled properly. That watch is irreplaceable. My wife..." He'd stopped, emotion catching his voice. "Just find it." Davidson had promised immediate action. He'd spent the day building his case, reviewing footage he'd carefully curated, preparing his presentation. He'd called Margaret's supervisor and requested she be brought in for a meeting the following day. He'd contacted the police to file a report, establishing official documentation. He'd even called the insurance company to begin the claim process. Everything by the book. Everything painting Margaret as the only possible suspect. That evening, Margaret received the call from her supervisor. "Margaret, I need you to come in tomorrow at 4 p.m. before your shift. There's been an incident." "What kind of incident?" Margaret had asked, her stomach already knotting with unnamed dread. "Just be here at 4. Mr. Davidson wants to speak with you." Margaret had barely slept that night. An incident? What incident? Had she broken something? Missed cleaning something important? She'd mentally reviewed every office she cleaned, every task she completed, searching for the mistake she must have made. She arrived at 3:45, her uniform freshly pressed, her hands twisting together nervously as she rode the service elevator up to the administrative floor. The conference room was waiting. Davidson, her supervisor, 2 security guards, HR Director Linda Walsh sitting with a legal pad and an expression of studied neutrality. "Please sit down, Mrs. Chun," Linda had said. And then Davidson had laid out his case. A valuable watch missing. Security footage showing Margaret's presence. No other possible suspects. The unspoken accusation hanging in the air like smoke. Margaret's protestations of innocence met with patient, condescending nods. The request to search her belongings. The implication that cooperation would be viewed favorably. That resistance would only make things worse. "I understand this is difficult," Linda had said, using the same tone someone might use with a child caught lying. "But we need to resolve this quickly. If you return the watch now, we can discuss this as a personnel matter rather than a criminal one." "I don't have the watch," Margaret had said, her voice stronger than she felt. "I've never stolen anything in my life." Davidson had sighed, a theatrical sound of disappointment. "Mrs. Chun, we want to give you every opportunity here. But if you're not willing to cooperate, we'll have no choice but to involve the police and conduct a full investigation. Your locker will be searched. Your car will be searched. Your home could be searched with a warrant. Is that really what you want? For your daughter to come home from college and find police at her door?" The mention of her daughter had been like a slap. Margaret's breath had caught. Sarah, 20 years old, working so hard, believing in the future her mother was sacrificing everything to give her. The shame of police showing up, of neighbors watching, of Sarah's friends and professors hearing that her mother was a thief. "Search whatever you want," Margaret had said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I have nothing to hide." And they had. Her locker, clean except for her street clothes, her lunch container, a worn paperback novel, her shoulder bag, wallet with $47, her phone, hand sanitizer, a pack of tissues, Sarah's school photo, her car in the parking garage, empty McDonald's cups in the cup holder, a tire pressure gauge in the glove box, an ice scraper in the back seat. Nothing. The watch could be anywhere, Davidson had said smoothly. You've had 24 hours to dispose of it. Sell it. Hide it. This proves nothing except that you were smart enough not to keep it on you. This is insane, Margaret had said, tears finally breaking through. Why would I steal? I've worked here for 6 years. 6 years without a single complaint. Why would I risk everything for a watch? Financial pressure? Davidson had suggested, his tone falsely sympathetic. I understand your daughter's tuition must be a burden. Medical bills from your husband's illness? It's understandable. People make mistakes when they're desperate. It had been the cruelest cut, using her grief and her struggles as evidence of criminality. Linda Walsh had cleared her throat. Mrs. Chun, at this point, given the evidence and your inability to provide an alibi or explanation, we have no choice but to suspend you without pay pending the outcome of the police investigation. You're required to turn in your access card and keys immediately. You're not to return to the building or contact any employees. Do you understand? Margaret had understood perfectly. She was being erased, disappeared, turned from a person into a problem that needed to be eliminated. She'd handed over her keys and card with shaking hands and walked out of that conference room with her head high, even though everything inside her was collapsing. She'd driven home in a daze, parked in her driveway, and sat in the car for 20 minutes before she could force herself to move. Inside her small rental house, the one she'd moved to after selling the home she'd shared with her husband because she couldn't afford the mortgage alone, she'd finally broken down. But Margaret Chun was not someone who stayed broken. She dried her tears, made herself tea, and started thinking. Someone had stolen that watch. If it wasn't her, and she knew with absolute certainty it wasn't, then someone had either stolen it and let her take the blame, or worse, had framed her deliberately. Either way, she needed proof of her innocence. She needed to understand what had actually happened that night. She'd pulled out her phone and started making a list. What did she know? She'd cleaned Patterson's office between 10:40 and 11:15. The watch had been there when she arrived. She'd actually seen it while dusting because Patterson had left his drawer slightly open, and the watch box had been visible. She remembered noticing it because it looked expensive, and she'd carefully closed the drawer to keep dust out, the same way she did with any open drawer or cabinet she encountered. So the watch had been there at 10:40 and gone by the next morning. Who else had access to that floor between her leaving and Patterson arriving? Building security. cleaning supervisors, the building manager, anyone with a master key. Her phone rang. Sarah calling from college. Margaret almost didn't answer. Couldn't bear the thought of lying to her daughter, but also couldn't bear the thought of telling her the truth. "Hi, honey," she managed, keeping her voice steady. "Mom, you sound weird. Are you okay?" "Just tired. Long shift last night." "You worked too hard." Sarah's voice carried that mix of affection and concern that made Margaret's heart ache. "Listen, I wanted to tell you. I got an A on my organic chemistry exam. The one I was freaking out about." "That's wonderful, sweetheart. I'm so proud of you." "I couldn't have done it without you, Mom. I know how hard you work to keep me here. I just wanted you to know. I see it. I appreciate it. I'm going to make you proud." "You already do, baby. Every single day." After they hung up, Margaret sat in the silence of her kitchen and felt the full weight of what was at stake. Not just her job, not just her reputation, but her daughter's future. If she was convicted of theft, even if she avoided jail time, she'd never work in a building like Westbridge again, never pass a background check, never earn enough to keep Sarah in school. Everything she'd built since her husband died would collapse. No, she wouldn't let that happen. The next day, Margaret did something she'd never done before. She called a lawyer. She couldn't afford one, not really, but she found a legal aid society that offered a free consultation. The lawyer, a young woman named Jennifer Park, who looked barely older than Sarah, had listened to Margaret's story with increasing attention. "They suspended you without pay based entirely on access logs?" Jennifer had asked. "No witnesses, no physical evidence, no confession. They said I was the only one who could have taken it." "That's not evidence. That's circumstantial at best. Did they actually show you the footage?" Margaret had paused. "They showed me a freeze frame on a tablet. My cart near Patterson's office. But I was supposed to be there. That's my job." Jennifer had made notes rapidly. "And they searched your belongings without a warrant?" "I gave permission. I thought cooperation would help prove my innocence." "It rarely does." Jennifer had looked up, her expression serious. "Mrs. Chun, here's the situation. You're in a vulnerable position, but you also have rights. They can't terminate you without due process, especially if you're not even arrested. But they can make your life miserable while this drags out. What we need is counter-evidence. Something that proves you couldn't have taken the watch, or better yet, proves someone else did." "How do I get that?" "Security footage is the obvious answer, but if they control the footage, they control the narrative." However, Jennifer had tapped her pen thoughtfully. Building security systems aren't perfect. Sometimes there are redundancies, backup systems, corporate oversight. Do you know if Westbridge has multiple security systems? Margaret had shaken her head. "I just clean. I don't know about that stuff." "I'll make some calls. In the meantime, document everything. Every conversation, every interaction, everyone who had access to that floor. Time stamps, if you can remember them. Any detail might matter." Margaret had left the legal aid office with the first spark of hope she'd felt since this nightmare began. She'd gone home and started writing, page after page of details. The layout of the 22nd floor, the sequence of offices she'd cleaned, the time she'd moved between floors, the sound of the elevator arriving while she was in Patterson's office, the footsteps passing by. The footsteps. She'd stopped writing, pen hovering over the paper. Someone had been on that floor while she was working. Someone whose footsteps she'd heard but whose face she'd never seen. Someone who could have entered any office after she moved on. She'd called Jennifer immediately. "There was someone else on the floor. I heard them." "Can you identify them?" "No, but they were there. Between 11 and 11:15, someone walked past Patterson's office and went into another room." "That's good. That's very good. It establishes reasonable doubt at minimum. Can you pinpoint exactly when?" Margaret had closed her eyes, forcing herself back into that night, into those moments. "I was cleaning the windows. So probably 11:05? 11:10. Somewhere in there. I'm going to request the full security footage through discovery if this goes to charges. They can't just show you selected frames. They have to provide everything." But what Jennifer didn't know, what Margaret didn't know, was that the full security footage from the old system had already been edited by Davidson and Jerry. The timestamps had been carefully preserved, but the actual footage had been manipulated. A gap had been inserted where Davidson had entered and exited. The narrative was clean, airtight, or it would have been, if not for that second system. 2 days after Margaret's suspension, Mr. Patterson received a call from corporate IT. They were conducting a routine audit of the new AI-enhanced security system and had found some anomalies in the footage from his floor. Would he be available to review? Patterson, still furious about his stolen watch and unsatisfied with the pace of the investigation, had agreed immediately. He'd gone to the IT department's temporary office in the building's basement level, where a technician named David Zhao sat, surrounded by monitors displaying multiple camera angles. "Mr. Patterson, I want to show you something," David had said, pulling up footage dated the night of the theft. "This is from our new system. It's not integrated with building security yet, so they don't have access to these recordings. I was running diagnostics and noticed something strange." He'd played footage showing the 22nd floor hallway. Timestamp, 11:43 p.m. Robert Davidson appeared on screen, looking left and right before approaching Patterson's office door. He'd used a key to enter, been inside for exactly 4 minutes and 12 seconds, then exited with what appeared to be a bulge in his jacket pocket. Patterson had stared at the screen in disbelief. That's the building manager." "Yes, sir. And there's more." David had pulled up another angle, showing Davidson stopping at his own office. "This is from the hallway camera. You can see him make a phone call. We don't have audio on these cameras, but the timestamp matches a call logged to the security desk. I can get the phone records if needed." "Why are you showing me this instead of security?" David had hesitated, because the head of building security, Jerry Morrison, is the one who received that call. And when I compared the footage from our system to the footage from the old system that security provided for the investigation, the old system has a gap. A clean edit right where Davidson enters and exits your office. Someone tampered with it. Patterson's face had gone through a rapid series of expressions: shock, anger, betrayal, calculation. That cleaning woman they accused, Mrs. Chun, she didn't take my watch. Based on this footage? No, sir. She was off the floor by 11:20. This shows Davidson entering your office 23 minutes later. I need copies of this footage. All of it. And I need you to preserve the original files, where no one can tamper with them. Already done, sir. Corporate IT has automatic cloud backups. These files are locked and verified. Patterson had stood up, his hands clenched into fists. I want a meeting. Now. Davidson, Jerry Morrison, Linda Walsh from HR, and whoever is heading the investigation. Conference room B in 30 minutes. Sir, with respect, maybe we should involve the police first? If Davidson has been stealing. 30 minutes, Patterson had repeated, his voice hard. I want to look that son of a bitch in the eye before the cops take him away. The meeting had been arranged. Davidson had walked in confident, expecting another update session about the Chun investigation. Jerry had followed, his expression nervous, but controlled. Linda Walsh had brought her legal pad, ready to take notes. Patterson had waited until everyone was seated. Then he'd nodded to David Zhao. I'm going to show you all something, Patterson had said quietly. And then we're going to have a very honest conversation about theft, fraud, and criminal conspiracy. He'd played the footage. Davidson's face had gone white, then red, then a sickly gray color. Jerry had actually stood up as if to run, then sat back down when he realized security guards were standing outside the glass-walled conference room. Linda Walsh's pen had frozen mid-word. Mr. Patterson, Davidson had started, his voice shaking. I can explain. You stole my watch. You framed an innocent woman. You corrupted building security to help you. That about sum it up. It's not this is out of context. I was conducting my own investigation. I had reason to believe. Stop. Patterson's voice cut like a blade. Just stop. I've already called the police. They're on their way. I've also called every executive in this building who's reported missing property in the past year. Turns out there's quite a list. A laptop here, A fountain pen there, a designer handbag, several watches, jewelry, cash. All missing during your tenure as building manager. All blamed on cleaning staff or written off as misplaced. David had pulled up another screen, this one showing a spreadsheet. I've been cross-referencing the new system footage with theft reports going back 14 months. Davidson appears on camera near or in the vicinity of every single reported theft within hours of it being reported. The pattern is consistent. You set up innocent people, Patterson had continued, his voice tight with controlled rage. You used your position to steal, and when you got caught, you destroyed careers to cover your tracks. How many people have you done this to? How many lives have you ruined? Davidson had slumped in his chair, the fight draining out of him. Jerry had put his head in his hands. I want to know everything, Patterson had said. Every theft, every person you framed, every penny you stole. Because when the police get here in, he'd checked his watch. About 8 minutes. You're going to be charged with enough crimes to put you away for a very long time. And the only thing that might possibly reduce your sentence is full cooperation. Linda Walsh had found her voice. We need to contact Mrs. Chun immediately. Her suspension needs to be reversed. Full back pay. Full apology. God, if she's already hired a lawyer, we could be looking at a massive lawsuit. She deserves a massive lawsuit, Patterson had interrupted. We accused her of a crime she didn't commit. We suspended her without pay. We humiliated her. Call her. Tell her the truth. Tell her we're sorry. And tell her whatever she wants in terms of compensation. We'll negotiate in good faith, because this is our fault for not catching Davidson sooner. The police had arrived exactly 7 minutes later. They'd reviewed the footage, taken statements, and placed Robert Davidson and Jerry Morrison under arrest for theft, fraud, conspiracy, tampering with evidence, and a growing list of other charges. As they'd led Davidson out in handcuffs, he'd passed by the cleaning closet where Margaret's replacement was organizing supplies. A young man who'd been told he was filling in for a thief. The young man had watched Davidson's perp walk with wide eyes, not understanding yet what he was witnessing. But Margaret had understood perfectly when Linda Walsh called her that evening. Mrs. Chun, this is Linda Walsh from Westbridge. I need to speak with you urgently. It's about your case. Margaret's heart had stopped. Am I being arrested? No. God, no. Mrs. Chun, you were right. You didn't steal anything. We have proof. Security footage we didn't have before. It shows the actual thief. It was Robert Davidson, the building manager. He stole the watch and framed you. He's been arrested. We're reversing your suspension immediately, effective retroactively. You'll receive full back pay for every hour you missed. And we'd like to meet with you and your legal representation to discuss compensation for what you've been put through. Margaret had sat down heavily on her couch, the phone pressed to her ear, not quite able to process the words. He framed me? Why? Because he needed a scapegoat. He'd been stealing from the building for over a year, using cleaning staff as cover. You were in the wrong place at the wrong time. I'm so sorry. The company is so sorry. This should never have happened. The apology had felt hollow in the face of what Margaret had endured. The sleepless nights, the fear, the shame, the terror of losing everything. But beneath the hollow feeling was something else, vindication, truth, justice, finally. I want to see the footage, Margaret had said. Of course. Absolutely. Whenever you're ready. Margaret had called Jennifer Park immediately. They'd scheduled a meeting for the following day. When Margaret arrived at Westbridge Tower, she'd walked through the front entrance instead of the service entrance, her head high, and taken the main elevator instead of the service elevator. Linda Walsh and Mr. Patterson himself had met her in the conference room, the same room where she'd been accused, where her life had nearly been destroyed. Mrs. Chun, Patterson had said, standing to shake her hand, I owe you an apology that words can't adequately express. What was done to you was unconscionable. I want you to know that we've launched a full internal investigation into our security protocols and our treatment of all staff, particularly cleaning and maintenance workers. This revealed systemic failures in how we handle theft investigations and how we treat employees. That's on us. That's on me. He'd played the footage for her. All of it. The AI systems recordings showing Davidson's approach, his entry into the office, his theft, his phone call to Jerry, the careful coordination of their cover-up. Margaret had watched in silence, her face carefully neutral, as the evidence of her innocence played out in crystal clarity. The police are building a case against Davidson and Morrison, Patterson had continued. They've already recovered some of the stolen property from a pawn shop in Newark. Your testimony may be needed during the trial, if you're willing to participate. I'm willing, Margaret had said quietly. I want everyone to know what he did. Not just to me, to everyone he framed before me. Jennifer Park had leaned forward. Mr. Patterson, Ms. Walsh, my client has suffered significant emotional distress, reputational harm, and financial hardship as a result of this incident. Beyond reinstatement and back pay, we'll be seeking compensation for those damages. We understand, and we're prepared to negotiate fairly. Mrs. Chun, we'd also like to offer you a position on our newly formed Employee Advocacy Committee. Your insights into how staff are treated, what protections need to be in place, would be invaluable. It would come with a raise and better hours, if you're interested. Margaret had looked at him steadily. I appreciate the offer, Mr. Patterson. I'll think about it. But right now, I just want my job back. The job I've done honestly for 6 years. The job I was good at before someone decided I was disposable enough to sacrifice. The words had landed like stones. Patterson had nodded slowly. You're right. I understand. Your position is waiting whenever you're ready to return. The trial had happened 4 months later. By then, the police had uncovered Davidson's entire operation. 17 thefts over 14 months. Total value exceeding $130,000. 3 cleaning staff members framed and fired before Margaret. 2 maintenance workers placed under suspicion. A security consultant brought in to investigate the pattern of insider theft, who'd nearly blamed the victims. The insurance claims Davidson had filed, collecting payouts while selling the stolen property through a fence who'd eventually cooperated with prosecutors. Jerry's mounting gambling debts that made him vulnerable to Davidson's recruitment. The evidence was overwhelming. The AI security footage was damning. And when Margaret took the stand to describe what she'd endured, the accusation, the search, the suspension, the fear of losing everything, the impact on her daughter, several jurors had visible tears in their eyes. Davidson's defense attorney had tried to paint him as a man driven by financial pressure, by medical bills from a sick parent, by circumstances beyond his control. But the prosecutor had systematically dismantled that narrative. Davidson's parent was healthy and financially secure. Davidson himself had been earning a comfortable salary. His thefts weren't acts of desperation, but of greed, enabled by opportunity and a fundamental lack of regard for the people he'd hurt. The jury had deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. Davidson had received a sentence of 8 years in prison, with restitution ordered for all victims. Jerry Morrison had pleaded out for a lesser sentence in exchange for his testimony, but he'd still received 3 years and lost his security license permanently. The fence in Newark had been prosecuted separately. The property management company had settled a class action lawsuit from the framed employees for an undisclosed sum, and Margaret had returned to work. She negotiated a raise and better health insurance, not because Westbridge was feeling generous, but because Jennifer Park was excellent at her job, and because Margaret now understood her value. She joined the Employee Advocacy Committee and pushed for policy changes, transparent investigation procedures, mandatory review by outside counsel before any employee could be accused of theft, security footage preservation requirements, and regular audits of security personnel. Sarah had graduated with honors and been accepted to medical school. At her graduation, she'd thanked her mother in her speech, describing the strength it took to fight for justice, to refuse to accept a false narrative, to protect not just herself, but all the people who came after her. Margaret had sat in the audience, tears streaming down her face, overwhelmed by pride and relief, and the knowledge that all of it, every struggle, every sacrifice, every moment of fear, had been worth it. The night Margaret returned to work for the first time after the trial, she'd taken the service elevator up to the 22nd floor and stood in the hallway outside Patterson's office. The building was quiet, The office is dark except for the emergency lighting. She'd pulled out her keys, returned to her with an apology, and unlocked the supply closet, where she kept her cart. Everything was exactly as she'd left it. The same bottles of cleaning solution, the same microfiber cloths, the same vacuum cleaner with the slightly sticky wheel. She'd run her hand along the cart's handle and felt the familiar grip, worn smooth by years of use. This was her tool. This was her work. This was her dignity, earned through honesty and effort, nearly stolen but ultimately reclaimed. She'd started cleaning, moving through Patterson's office with the same care and attention she'd always used. When she finished, she'd lock the door and move to the next office, and the next, reclaiming her routine one room at a time. Around 2 in the morning, as she was emptying the trash in the break room on 23, she'd heard footsteps approaching. She'd tensed automatically before reminding herself Davidson was in prison. Jerry was in prison. She was safe. Mr. Patterson had appeared in the doorway, carrying a briefcase. He'd stopped when he saw her. "Mrs. Chun, you're working late." "This is my shift, Mr. Patterson. 9:45 to 6 a.m. "Right. Of course." He'd hesitated. "I just wanted to say the office looks great. It always has. I realize I've walked past you for years, without really seeing the work you do. Without seeing you. I'm sorry for that, too." Margaret had set down the trash bag she'd been holding. "Thank you for saying that. You didn't have to come back. After everything, you could have taken the settlement and found work somewhere else. Somewhere without these memories." "I thought about it," Margaret had admitted. "But then I realized, this is my building too. I've cleaned every inch of it. I know it better than most of the executives who work here. Why should I let what Davidson did drive me away from work I'm good at? Work I'm proud of?" Patterson had nodded slowly. "You're a stronger person than I am, Mrs. Chun. Thank you for coming back. And thank you for making sure this can't happen to anyone else." He'd left her to finish her work. Margaret had completed the break room, then moved through the rest of the floor, her movements practiced and efficient. When she'd finally finished her shift at 6:15, running slightly over because she'd been meticulous about every detail on her first night back, she'd taken the elevator down to the lobby and walked out into the early morning light. The city was waking up around her. Delivery trucks making their rounds. Early commuters heading to the subway. The sky turning from black to gray to the pale blue of dawn. Margaret had stood on the sidewalk for a moment, breathing in the cold air, letting the reality of her victory settle into her bones. She'd been seen. She'd been heard. She'd been believed eventually, when the truth could no longer be denied. Her name had been cleared. Her dignity had been restored. The system that had nearly destroyed her had been forced to change, at least a little, at least enough that the next person might have a better chance. It wasn't perfect. The justice system moved slowly and imperfectly. The settlement money helped but couldn't erase the trauma of being accused, suspected, treated as guilty until proven innocent. The Employee Advocacy Committee meetings sometimes felt performative, with executives listening politely but resisting real change. Sarah still carried the memory of that phone call where her mother had finally broken down and told her what was happening. The fear that everything they'd worked for would collapse. But Margaret had learned something through all of it. Truth is stubborn. It doesn't disappear just because someone tries to bury it. It waits, persistent and patient, for someone brave enough to dig for it. And when it finally surfaces, when the light finally hits it, it has a weight and a power that no lie can match. The CCTV footage that exonerated her hadn't just exposed Davidson's crime. It had exposed the flaws in a system that made it too easy to blame the vulnerable, too convenient to accept the narrative that people in power wanted to tell. It had forced everyone who'd watched her suspension to confront their own assumptions about who commits crimes and who deserves the benefit of the doubt. Margaret had turned and walked toward her car, ready to drive home, eat breakfast, sleep for a few hours, and then wake up to pick Sarah up from the train station for winter break. Her daughter was coming home. Her job was secure. Her reputation was intact. The future she'd been fighting for was still there, still possible, still waiting for her to reach it. As she'd driven through the morning traffic, she'd thought about all the other cleaning staff in all the other buildings across the city. invisible to most of the people they served. She thought about the women and men who kept offices running, who emptied trash and scrubbed toilets and polished glass, who worked while others slept and remained unseen while others took credit. She thought about how easily any of them could become the next scapegoat, the next convenient explanation, the next person sacrificed to protect someone more powerful. And she'd made a silent promise. She wouldn't let what happened to her be forgotten. She would tell her story. She would push for change. She would make sure that the next time someone tried to frame an innocent person, there would be systems in place to catch the lie, to protect the vulnerable, to demand real evidence before ruining a life. The fight wasn't over. It would probably never be completely over, but it was a fight worth having. And this is where everything shifted, because now it wasn't just about one stolen watch or one corrupt building manager. It was about the truth they tried to bury, and the woman who refused to let them. Margaret Chen had been invisible for years, but when the moment came, when everything hung in the balance, she'd found her voice. She demanded to be seen. And in being seen, in having her truth validated and her innocence proven, she'd opened a door for everyone who'd been made invisible before her. The CCTV footage played in that conference room, in the courtroom, in news reports covering the scandal, became more than evidence of one man's crime. It became proof that questioning the official story, demanding real investigation, refusing to accept convenient scapegoating, could actually work. That justice, however imperfect and delayed, was still possible for people like Margaret Chen. 3 years after the trial, Margaret received a letter from Davidson in prison. She'd almost thrown it away unopened, but something made her read it. The letter was short, written in careful handwriting on prison stationery. Mrs. Chen, I know there's nothing I can say that will undo what I did to you. I stole your peace, your reputation, your sense of security. I did it because it was easy and because I thought you didn't matter enough for anyone to care. I was wrong. You mattered. You fought back. You won. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I'm just saying I'm sorry. I see now what I couldn't see then. You were a person. You had a life, a daughter, dreams, dignity. And I try to take all of that to cover my own crimes. I'm sorry. That's all I wanted to say. Margaret had read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and put it in a drawer. She didn't respond. She didn't owe Davidson her forgiveness or her words. But she kept the letter because it represented something important. Acknowledgement. The person who tried to erase her had been forced to see her, to name what he'd done, to admit the full weight of his crime. It was enough. Sarah finished medical school and started her residency in pediatrics. She specialized in advocating for families who struggled to navigate the healthcare system, who were overlooked or dismissed by doctors who didn't take time to listen. When people asked her why she chose that focus, she talked about her mother, about watching someone fight for dignity in a system designed to ignore her, about learning that visibility and voice had to be demanded, not waited for. Margaret eventually left Westbridge Tower for a position as Director of Facilities Management at a nonprofit organization providing affordable housing. She'd been recruited specifically because of her advocacy work, her understanding of how systems could fail vulnerable people, her commitment to building better structures. She hired formerly incarcerated people, people who'd been homeless, people who needed second chances. She built training programs and mentorship opportunities and advancement pathways. She created the kind of workplace she'd always deserved. On the anniversary of her exoneration, she received a call from Jennifer Park, who'd built a successful practice focusing on employment law and wrongful accusation cases. Jennifer had a new client, another cleaning woman from another building, accused of theft she didn't commit. Would Margaret be willing to testify as an expert witness about the patterns of scapegoating in building management? About the importance of proper investigation procedures? Margaret had said yes without hesitation. The fight continued. The work continued. But now Margaret had something she'd been denied for so long: power. Not the power to control or dominate, but the power to protect, to advocate, to ensure that the next person wouldn't have to fight alone the way she had. The CCTV footage that had saved her life had become a teaching tool, used in Jennifer's practice to show juries what real evidence looked like versus circumstantial assumption. It had been featured in a documentary about employment rights and the invisible workforce. It had sparked policy changes in building management associations across the state. One piece of video, one moment of truth, one woman's refusal to accept injustice, had rippled out far beyond Margaret's individual case. And every time Margaret thought about that night, standing in the conference room, accused and alone, knowing she was innocent but unable to prove it, she remembered what came after: the discovery of the truth, the public acknowledgement, the justice, however delayed, the changes that followed, the lives protected because she'd fought back. She'd been seen. Finally, completely, undeniably seen. And in that visibility, she'd found not just vindication but purpose. So let me ask you something. When was the last time you really saw the people who keep your world running? The people who clean your office, who deliver your food, who stock your shelves, who maintain your buildings while you sleep? What would you do if one of them was accused of something they didn't do? Would you question the narrative? Would you demand real evidence? Would you see them as fully human, deserving of the same justice you'd expect for yourself? Because Margaret Chen's story isn't unique. It's just the one that happened to be caught on camera. How many others are out there right now, fighting battles just like hers, without the evidence they need to prove their innocence? Think about it. And maybe, if you found this story worth your time, consider sharing it. Let's make sure that the next Margaret Chen doesn't have to fight alone.